It's the left versus the right. Debate. Heavyweight slugfest.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is the left versus the right here on this Saturday afternoon. Happy Valentine's Day. I hope you're wishing the people in your life that you love a happy Valentine's Day. So I happen to love Judge Richard Weinberg, and I'm going public with it. And so, Your Honor,
and I love you back. I love you back.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to you.
There might be some even more happy days ahead, because apparently President Xi of China is coming to the United States to visit President Trump, and those are two interesting circumstances occurring in one sentence. The fact that they're meeting is quite an achievement. And the fact that he's coming here, I think, is, even because of the media outlet and everything else, is really going to expand upon whatever it is that the president and the Chinese leader have been talking about.
Well, let me, as Richard Nixon would say, let me say this about that. Since it's Nixon's fault that we did the reach out to China, and our mutual friend Ed Cox, the New York State Republican chairman, was his son-in-law and knows a great deal about China, more than I'll ever know. But this is my problem with China. China has a long-range plan. They plot and scheme. Their goal is to be the dominant force in the world. Everything they do is calculated to do that. Then economic plans. We have a dependency on China for raw earth minerals, for pharmaceutical components, for supplies. And that's a very dangerous position for us to be in, for the United States to be in. I'm for energy independence. With the some of the raw earth minerals, you need them for your technology and for your chips. And that's a real problem, because without the technology and the chips, you go down to the dark ages of the pre-industrial revolution. So that's a real problem. We need to have independence from China as much as possible. And since they have a long-term agenda for world domination, it's very troubling. Additionally, it's a totalitarian country. That's a problem. They have incursions all around the world with their Belt and Road initiatives. Their army and their navy is built up. They're building these islands all over the world. You can't tell me that the COVID epidemic came out of a wet market. That's pure nonsense. Anybody believes that is naive at best and a fool at worst. Recently, you have Chinese labs, illegal labs found in Nevada and California with viruses, all kinds of dangerous viruses that could cause another pandemic. That's a serious business. You have spying going on across the United States. You have they've infiltrated academia, and they're always trying to undermine the United States. So having said all of that, do we have to meet with them? Sure. Do we want to have a full-blown war with them? Absolutely not. You don't get into a war unless you think you can win it. They're a nuclear power as we are, but you cannot dismiss their territorial aspirations and their threat to Southeast Asia. I mean, look at the Japanese just rallied behind the prime minister because of the threats that were made about Taiwan. And if you have any doubt that Xi is territorially ambitious, look what he did to Hong Kong. Your
Absolutely.
Thoughts? Your thoughts, Governor?
I believe that right in the beginning, you made a point that needs to be stated and restated. The Chinese mind and the American mind are totally different. Americans think about organizational activity. Americans think about how to build, how to increase the capacity of as many citizens as possible. But the Chinese don't think that way. They don't think in terms of decades. They think in terms of generations. They're willing to continue, as you pointed out, to infiltrate, to at times pretend to be working with another entity, and then all of a sudden they turn on the entity, and they look for probably more types of more advantages, and feeling that the advantages will inevitably add up. And at some point in the future, and it might be 50 years from now, that they will take over the world. Even the Russians have an askance view of the Chinese and what their inevitable goals are.
I think that's very well said. I think the problem, Russia always likes to think of itself as the big dog, but in a very real sense, they've become a satellite of the Red Chinese Communist Party. Totally dependent on them for their war in Ukraine and for their own territorial aspirations.
Well, look at the Russians now. They don't seem to know what to do with themselves. They're in this negotiation with the Ukraine. They're trying to appease the United States on some levels because they want different entities that we have that they don't have. And you're absolutely right. They are. There was a time, when, say, 50, 55 years ago, when they shrugged, we were mindful of it and at times frightened by it. But that is all kind of gone the way of time and the way of change. And I sense from time to time that very quietly the Russians are looking for help from the United States.
Well, there's a theory, and that's an interesting point you make, but there's a theory that we can make efforts to bring Russia into the world of nations and be part of the drive for Western civilization to prevail, that they have more in common with Western civilization than they do with the Chinese. The Chinese only understand one relationship, and that's how useful a country is to them, and they have to be the top dog. Russia's now dependent on them. They're the dependent power. So that's interesting. But, Putin's got himself involved in a situation. You're 4 years into this war. You have a couple of million casualties, large number of deaths, people maimed, constantly shooting at the Ukrainians. The pressure on Ukraine to make a deal is enormous. But the fact is the aggressor was Russia. I'm not a big fan of the doctrine of appeasement. I'm all for peace, but peace at what price? You have to have some payment by the Russians for their war of aggression and for their genocidal acts against the people of the Ukraine. And I'm very troubled by the fact that Trump believed that when he became president, he could settle the whole Ukrainian-Russia situation, in 24 or 48 hours. That's Donald Trump.
What is, Richard, is that there were some victories that he was able to achieve pretty much 24 to 48 hours when he first got in office.
Listen.
That first week.
But
I'm getting to another point, though. That first week, he was on a roll. And, I don't think it's any secret. I think even the president doesn't think it is a secret. He thinks very highly of himself. And as he continued to make these deals, he got down to Russia and just thought that this was just another deal. And they didn't see it that way. And I think that's where the beginning of what your concerns are started, right at that point.
Well, look, I have, notwithstanding the allegations of some people that you and I both know, I'm not a Trumpian. I've never carried Donald Trump's water. I give him credit where he achieves what he has to achieve. This country is far better off having Donald Trump as president of the United States than they would have been with a Harris-Walsh administration. My own views about what Obama and Biden did to this country is that they hurt us enormously.
When you put those three people together, I'm sorry just for interrupting for a second, Harris, Walls, and Biden. I saw a black exploitation movie once, and it was called 3: The Hard Way. These people really accomplished nothing. They did the opposite of what even moderates would think people should do. And particularly in the case of the former vice president, an arrogance that she emits almost every time she opens her mouth that not only demonstrates a bad attitude, but also an individual who really has not learned enough about government to be in the position she was running for president.
No, I the idea of having her as president of the United States is frightening. It's just frightening. But the problem is, and this is my theme, at least for this segment of the show we have today. Country's far better off, and Western civilization is far better off having Donald Trump as president. The Obama administration, with the help of Kerry, sold out this country to the Iranians with that ridiculous nuclear deal, which only gave them money, gave them a go-ahead for nuclear weapons, gave them the money and the resources to build up a terrorist network in the Middle East. The Iranians had contracts out in the mafia sense against former secretaries of state like Pompeo, national security advisors like John Bolton, and others, members of Congress who were opponents of that regime. This is serious business. Trump was cleaning up the mess that the Obama and Biden people did. And he doesn't get enough credit for that. So, for example, all the problems we have now with the ICE issue, Governor, and going into the cities, into the states to try to cleaning up violent criminals. They're not going after the dishwashers and the gardeners and the housekeepers. They're going after violent criminals to make cities and states safer. You have this resistance movement created by the crazy left and the Islamists to try to disrupt this country and to hurt this country. And they've been very successful at shifting the narrative and the focus. The fact of the matter is, if Biden had done his job, which he did not do, which is protect and defend the United States, carry out the lawful policy of the immigration, lawful immigration, good, illegal immigration, jumping the border, bad, and not rewarding people just jump the border. We can't afford to pay all these people and put them all on welfare programs. We certainly can't allow the mental institutions and the criminal coming in here, whether it's cartels or gangs. We can't allow spies coming in here. Why are the people so down on Donald Trump for doing the right thing to protecting and defending this country? And that all comes out of who controls the narrative. And you have a left-wing media which controls the narrative, which makes Trump out to be the bad guy. Did everything go perfectly in terms of enforcement? No. But no system is perfect. But when you have tens of millions of people thrown into a country where they have no right to be, no place to be, have to be supported, have to be housed, they have to be fed, they have to be clothed, you have to put them in the hospitals and medical care. This is an economic disaster in the making. And then you add on the fact that a large number of them are criminals. They said only 14% of violent criminals.
How would they know what percentage?
You got me. You got me. That 14%. Maybe it's the ones the cases that have been investigated and prosecuted. But by the way, on that 14%, Governor, that's only on the so-called violent ones, the rapists, the murderers. It's not the people, the embezzlers, the con artists. For example, like the Samayans in Minneapolis, maybe they don't do the old-fashioned mafia do, which is blow up a restaurant that doesn't pay extortion money, okay? But they stole at least $9 or $10 billion, and that's just the beginning of the discussion. And you have a large...
In the not-for-profits.
Yeah, and the not-for-profits, by the way, are awful. The not-for-profits are awful because they become a conduit for the Democratic Party, our party, for all kinds of corruption politically, and undermining a legitimate governmental system, wasted all that money, and that's a crime against the people of the United States, the decent people of the United States. Why aren't they holding the Biden administration accountable for that?
Well, what I want to ask you is, being a man of many letters, obviously a college degree,
Four degrees, all paid for, with probably less money than the first year tuition at a private school for kindergarten in New York
yes,
City.
things were a lot better in those days. But the one degree that you don't have, but I'd like to award it to you for a few minutes, is a degree in psychiatry. And the reason I want to bring this up is that, going back to what you said before, where did President Obama get the idea that Iran was his friend? What happened in the trade or even negotiations or even just the recognition of these two countries? Did he think there was a nexus for which he was going to wind up being the leader? And, clearly not. And, of course, my biggest problem with him is the only time that he demonstrated firm leadership was the number of people who were deported out of the country.
Right,
a
lot more than Trump.
Absolutely. And but his whole gestalt was that there should never be any real confrontation with anybody, to the point that those of us who supported him, and was a great achievement for the country to have a black president and the whole thing. But when we watched his operational method, we gave him the nickname "No Drama Obama." He never wanted to be in the middle of any kind of conflict.
Well, as the Catholic Church and the papacy always said, there's such thing as a just war. Sometimes you have to show strength to protect. Sometimes you have to go to war to protect. The Iranians have been at war with us for almost 50 years, 47 or 48 years, as you and I are talking. They started off after Carter, another genius, allowed the first Ayatollah to come back from Paris and then to go to a civil war against the Shah's people, and they won. And the radical...
With Ayatollah Khomeini.
Right. And the radical mullahs took over. First thing they did is grab the U.S. Embassy, and for 430-odd days they controlled the embassy, held the people hostage. Carter made an unsuccessful attempt to liberate them and wound up having helicopters crash in the desert. Carter looked weak, was weak, made a serious mistake. So when you do something that foolish, and to your point about Obama, when you do something that foolish, and I think the Iranians were foolish for doing that, they didn't need to do that. Since it was the president of the United States who allowed the Ayatollah to come back, they could have cut a deal, a non-aggression pact, pretty much like Stalin and Hitler, a non-aggression pact for a certain period of time, and left each other alone. The United States was not interested in taking over Iran. They were interested in some sort of settlement agreement. Carter let the Ayatollahs in, and then what happened? It speaks for itself. This disaster of 47, 48 years of a despotic, theocratic regime where they kill their own people. They have tanks outside. People say, well, the demonstrations are over. Demonstrations are over because you walk in the streets, they shoot you down. They have the tanks there. They have the machine guns there. People are disappearing by the thousands. They just almost beat to death a Nobel Prize winner, the woman who's a pro-democracy advocate. These are serious issues. They were just recently reported they go into the hospitals and they're shooting people in the head.
Well, as we continue to discuss these kind of lachrymose issues on this Saturday afternoon, which is Valentine's Day, we're going to take a little break, and I'll be back with His Honor Richard Weinberg. And those of you who are listening in, this is 77 WABC. It's the Left versus the Right here on Friday, 3 until 4 o'clock. And apparently at 4 o'clock, you're going to stay here and do another program.
Yes, I have a show which is broadcast between 4 and 5 on WABC on Saturdays, and again between 6 and 7 on Sunday mornings. It's called Let the Record Show. My co-hosts are Chairman Jesse Garcia for the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the State Party and the County Chair of the Suffolk Party, and noted attorney and commentator and essayist Eric Levine. And the three of us have always interesting, what we like to believe is important conversations, as well as often very interesting, important guests.
Well, we'll talk more about that right after these messages.
It's the left versus the right. It's the left versus the right. Debate. Heavyweight slugfest.
We're back on the left versus the right. And my guest is my friend and colleague, radio broadcasting partner on Thursdays and Fridays from 5 to 6 on the Katz and Cosby program, Richard Weinberg. And it was really quite a recitation of history and policy, and also analysis of the many times this government allowed issues to slip right through their hands, and things became worse than they were prior. And that is my guest, Richard Weinberg. And so, Richard, it's 2026. It's the off-election year. The midterms, as they call them. Your thoughts about what is going to happen? I know we're in February. That will be in November. But you always have had long-term capacity. I've even thought at times that you're psychic. What do you think the midterms are going to reveal?
Well, let's start with the first observation I want to make, Governor, which is I think it's fairly clear that this is a nation that's divided. I don't think this country has been this divided since the Civil War. I think the ability to find common shared values and goals is under attack. The center, the show is called Left versus Right, but here you and I are, and we're both common sense moderate Democrats. But the left versus the right is a real problem, because the common sense Republicans, the common sense Democrats are being marginalized within their own parties.
I think, Your Honor, just to cut in for a second, that one thing that might bridge this gap would be a Democrat with strong values and one that doesn't jump up and scream every time the Republican leadership does something. Kind of like a younger version of Fetterman from Pennsylvania, the senator. But I think that's what it would take to turn the tide, is someone who is respected within their party, making that reach to talk about the efforts of, let's say, this is a Democrat talking about the efforts of a Republican Party, and start meeting each other halfway. No one's right all the time, and it's gets to a point where it's unnerving. You don't even want to listen to the news because of the retorts. On Friday, President Trump threatened 6 Republican senators who voted against his tariff act, and he says he's going to primary them. Now, the day before, on Thursday, it came out that the Fed has determined that Americans lost money on his tariffs. And they weren't making a political statement. They just showed the evidence that the average American that invests will lose $1,000 this year because a lot of the money went to support the tariffs. Now, here again, here's President Trump doing this to people in his own party. And of course, that antagonism, extends to the other party when he wants to. But there's so many things that we could do to try and respect each other. I think that's the word, and really in an attempt to bring the country back together and to hear what people from the other party are saying. I don't understand how it's going to happen, but that's as an architect, the idea of what it would look like.
Well, you're absolutely correct that we need somebody like that. But as I look at the benches of the Democratic Party, as you and I know it, all across the country, whether you're talking about governorships or you're talking about U.S. senators or even business people, I don't see that person who has that ability to do it or has the will to do it. And there may be a lot of reasons why that's true, including the fact that there's a tribalism within each of the two parties. I frankly believe that the Republican Party has a much better bench than the Democratic Party by far. They have some outstanding people who could lead this country in an intelligent, common sense way with moderate views and consensus builders. Off the top of my head, I would say to you people like Secretary of State Marco Rubio is an example.
I agree.
Of that. Senator Tim Cotton is an example of that. Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee is an example of that. Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska is an example of that. These are very solid people, and I, like you and I have the occasion to meet some of these people. In terms of our own relationships, or because of our connection to WABC and to John Catsimatidis. So you and I know a lot of these people. So we're not talking in the abstract. We actually sit down and have conversations with them. These are solid people who I would have every confidence if they were leaders of this country, any of those four. And I'm sure I've left out a whole bunch of others as well. I don't see that same thing happening in the Democratic Party.
Well, you know, the Republican members who have these positions that they have, they're senators, one of them is the Secretary of State, and that kind of thing. They don't just sit quietly and go to work and go home and watch television all night. They're all over the place. Katz and Cosby, rarely is there a day that they don't interview 3 nationally known and even potentially the inertia of running for a higher office than some of the guests on that particular show. Where are the Democrats? Nobody seems to be, beating on John's door to come on the show and give their point of view. And John really believes in fairness. He let them on.
Well, in fact, we try to reach out all the time. But we've had Fetterman on the show.
Yeah, well, he is really amazing because, he was a target running for the Senate in Pennsylvania. The Republicans were after him. Then he comes to Congress and to the Senate, and he stands among maybe the 4 or 5 most gifted leaders in the Senate right now. The things he says, no one's going to agree with everything someone says, but they certainly would bring us to an understanding among our government officials, and hopefully that is the trickle-down effect in this country. Not money, but thought.
Well, look, and I don't know, did you know Senator Lieberman of Connecticut?
I've met him a few times.
I knew Senator Lieberman. John was very close to Senator Lieberman. He was an example of a common sense Democrat who was repudiated by his own party in a primary and wound up running as an independent for re-election to the United States Senate, and who won that race. He was also previously had been a vice presidential candidate with Gore in the 1980 election, and he spoke in favor of the senator from Arizona who ran for the presidency against Obama at the Republican convention. Okay, so, but those people are not there anymore. And when I say this is a country divided, there doesn't seem to be the will or the desire to reach common shared values. Everybody is at everybody's throats. And you have, and this is a dangerous proposition, you have foreign money coming in here funding political campaigns. It's being investigated by both houses of the Congress. It's being investigated by the Justice Department. That's very serious, because what our foreign enemies want to do is they want to undermine a consensus in this country.
And control the process in this country.
And control the process and weaken us against our foreign adversaries.
So Your Honor, what did you think about, we talk about January 6th, the things that happened on that day, but we had an incident in January just a month and a half ago where the president went into Venezuela and basically dethroned the head of the country and removed him to the United States, where he will be tried for the crimes that he clearly committed. And I'm not going to try to say that I know that he's guilty, but he acts like he's guilty. And I thought that for those couple of days, I felt a resilience. I felt a feeling that somebody took an action. Even Donald Trump, who a lot of people don't like, supported that action that he took, and that it's that kind of swagger that you have to have as a president, or even as elected officials with the House and Senate, and even state elected officials around the country. And they all have fundraisers. They all have someone introduce them to say, and he doesn't let himself get intimidated. Well, someone's getting intimidated because we're really not moving forward with this this type of government that we have right now.
Well, you made a reference earlier, Governor. You said about me getting a degree in psychology. I always call it political psychology.
Ah, yes.
So I'll take that degree if you can confer that upon me. But this is my view. You know, one of the operating cliches of our time is a concept called Trump derangement syndrome. Trump derangement syndrome. Look, it's not just a glib expression. It really has to do with the mindset of large numbers of people in this country. People are not necessarily political operatives or government officials. People, just average people. You know, you have people who are true believers with respect to Trump, and you have people who suffer from Trump derangement syndrome, and they can't see beyond the dislike of what they consider despicable conduct on the part of the President of the United States. Now, I would be the first one to say certain things that Donald Trump does, I think, are inappropriate, and he shouldn't do that. I don't think they're presidential, and I think they're self-defeating, and I think he hurts himself by not having a broader view, and he doesn't have to get involved in these petty controversies. He doesn't need to have Penn Station named after him. He doesn't need to put his name on the Kennedy Center. That's all nonsense. He should pay attention to what the important thing is: protecting and defending the United States, making sure our national security is safe, our hemisphere is safe, fighting the axis of evil that want to overwhelm us, fighting this global Islamist hegemonic ambition. These are important things. Having your name on Penn Station or the Kennedy Center is totally unimportant. And as you know, because you were, without naming names, but you were an eyewitness to an event just last week when there was a discussion amongst a group of us, and we were talking about what ICE has or has not done in Minneapolis, and it became a very heated argument. The heated argument was made by one particular person who one would have hoped was smart enough and had enough common sense to deal with the issue on the merits, and this person went out of his, her, it, or them's way to say, well, look at the video. The ICE kidnapped this 5-year-old kid. Well, the fact of the matter is that's not true. That's deliberate distortion, misinformation. The kid was abandoned by the father when the ICE agents went in to make the arrest. They tried to bring the kid back to the home.
And the mother
wife
wouldn't take him.
And you could not tell this person who was in the room with us, Governor, that those were the facts. And as a result of that, she said to me, or he said to me, or it or them said to me, as follows, that I was a disgrace to my party, and I was a disgrace to the human race. Now this is supposed to be an intelligent human being. I'm a lot of things. I don't think I'm a disgrace to my party, and I certainly have try to do enough good deeds in my life not to be a disgrace to the human race. But that's what the discourse has gotten down to. And this is supposed to be an intelligent person.
Yes. Well, for the listeners at home, we're not naming any names here.
We're definitely not naming names.
But this individual came in and started this rant about what had gone on, and actually what the feds did with the 5-year-old was to take him someplace where he could be warm and have
not leave him in the cold, abandoned. Right.
They wanted to leave him out there, and so they were carrying on. At the time, both myself and Judge Weinberg were sitting in the room, and Judge Weinberg made one comment. It was as if you threw a match in the gasoline tank.
Do you remember what my comment was?
In a car. It was, I'm not going to stay in this room with radical, ultra-left people, as he was leaving. The individual decided that maybe His Honor couldn't get back to his office and went out after him, and the battle continued to a certain degree. It was one of the more stunning experiences I've had, in the time working in radio.
But isn't that an example of what we have? Isn't that the problem?
It actually is. So we're going to come back in just a couple of moments. I have a question for His Honor, so I'm going to give him a chance to prepare himself for this. In the meantime, we're going to let our sponsors have a time on the air. I don't know what's happening to me. This is WABC. We're the left versus the right. I'm David Paterson. He's Richard Weinberg. Which one of us is on the right?
Neither.
Exactly.
And neither we're on the left.
We'll be right back.
It's the left versus the right. It's the left versus the right. Debate. Heavyweight slugfest.
We're back for the final segment of the left versus the right, but not the final time you're going to hear Judge Richard Weinberg, because he comes on just a few minutes from now at 4 o'clock with his show, Let the Record Show. And if you have something else to do, it is Valentine's Day, you might be going someplace, but tomorrow morning it will be aired again from 6 to 7 a.m. And I highly commend to everyone that it's a great show. One of the few shows that's hosted by 3 individuals, which in radio they would never have thought to do that years ago. Here it totally works. So, Your Honor, Jim Jordan,
Chairman of the House
Judiciary Committee, has put in some legislation about banning the application of sanctuary cities or sanctuary states. We are the United States. This country is a sanctuary, and I don't really understand, and nor do I think that there's anything that legalizes the idea that these states, in situations that are unique because of a great deal of fervor in the atmosphere, and what's going on in this country is the inverse of what went on in 1964, 65, 66, 67 in the southern states, where they refused to allow the Constitution of the United States. They banned, they were segregating the schools, they were segregating housing,
voting discrimination,
many attacks on people of color, and also white people who were trying to help people of color. So here we are now, 24, 25, 26, 27, and we're seeing the inverse of that, where there is an attempt to thwart what would be the edict of our government from the head of it, even though it's President Trump. He's the president. And the idea that you can just get up and make a speech like the mayor of Minnesota did when he came out after his meeting yesterday with Mayor Mamdani, that we're not going to allow people to come in our neighborhoods and do this type of thing. That's the same kind of thing you heard from George Wallace. And so I just wanted you to reflect on how these incidents are tearing at the fabric of this country.
Well, that's very well said, Governor. This is the problem. We're a government of laws, not of men. That's the operating principle. The operating principle of our constitutional system is that it's a federal system. There are roles for the states, roles for the federal government. There's something called the supremacy clause of the United States Constitution, where there's a conflict between the policies of the state and the policies of the federal government lawfully enacted. The policy of the states fail. The policy of the federal government prevails. That's the supremacy clause. It's clearly settled. It's been settled that way for at least since the Civil War of the United States, the North versus South War. The attempt of a city or a state to nullify federal law is wholly unconstitutional. It's wholly illegal. Any office holder who will not enforce and abide by the laws of the federal government should not hold office. If they aid and abet a violation of that law, that's criminal conduct, and they should be punished for it. The rules that seem to say that there's no obligation of local state governments to help the feds enforce the law, but they can't do anything to aid and abet the resistance against the law or to undermine the enforcement. And what these characters in Minnesota have done is they're undermining, and in many ways aiding, abetting, and encouraging an insurrection against the United States. And there is such a law as the Insurrection Act, and they could, in a right factual context, be prosecuted for that. And what they've done is they're undermining the institutional constraints that make us one country. So when I talk about the earlier segment about nation divided, if you have people who believe that these insurrectionists, these insurgents, have a right to undercut federal law enforcement, duly constituted, of a duly enacted law of the United States Congress, signed by the United States President, they have no right to undercut that. If they don't want to assist in making the arrest, that's fine, but they have no right to withdraw police protection for the ICE agents when they're carrying out their duties. They have no right to deny access into the jails or the prisons to pick up criminal defendants who are subject to the immigration laws. And that's what they've done. This is an attempt at nullification of federal law. It's unconstitutional. It's illegal. It may well be an insurgency or an insurrection that's criminal. And if they aid and abet this is a dangerous phenomenon because it divides this country and it puts us in a civil war context. And we have to be very, very careful about that. So,
well, the inertia inherent in Minneapolis changed when Tom Holman was sent in there, and he has, in a very short period of time, gotten everything in a place where it should be. He went and spoke to the heads of law enforcement, even to the political leaders there. We're pretty much withdrawing from that. I thought two things about that. Number one, I thought that the president, and how many times do I have to say I don't agree with him? Like
neither
7
one of us
out
agrees.
of 10.
I probably agree with him more times than you do, Governor. But I don't agree with him 100%. And I'm right. And I haven't drunk the Trump Kool-Aid.
Right. But in this situation, I thought they showed a tremendous amount of restraint. They didn't, send 50,000, troops in from someplace. They sent a man who has been in this type of situation before. He handled it just as adroitly as he did in the past, and now we're moving on from that. And you'd think that the people who are bad-mouthing him and the other federal officials who were there, it's a wonder they didn't have a full-scale riot in Minneapolis. They had some...
Well, they had it. Remember, they had it in 2020 in the summer, so-called Summer of Love, with BLM and Antifa, burned Minneapolis down, took over police stations, try to firebomb federal courthouses. I mean, this is serious stuff. This is insurrection against the government of the United States, and it's an attempt to undermine public safety and law and order.
Reminiscent of 1964 and 1965, when there were these same types of eruptions in the inner cities all around the country. And fortunately, up until very recently, we hadn't seen anything that would even remind you of that. But this situation certainly did. And so I really think that what Democrats in the House and Senate could do right now is to support the legislation, because it is within the guidelines of our Constitution, whereas the activities that we've seen in the past couple of months are almost discounting that there is a Constitution.
No, I think that's right. I'm very troubled by that, because unless you can agree to the institutional norms of law and order, public safety, respect for divergent views, we're going to have a real problem. Because how do you build? If you don't believe in a system of checks and balances, law and order, public safety, understand our constitutional framework, the reason it's been so successful for the 250 years we've been in existence, if you don't understand that, then where do we get that ability to stay as one people united? And the answer is we don't. Which leads me to a different issue, but it's related, Governor. And there's another piece of legislation that's being proposed by Senator Cornyn of the state of Texas. And John Cornyn is a very distinguished United States senator, a very decent man, former justice of the Supreme Court of the state of Texas, as well as being the Attorney General of the state of Texas. Really a first-rate senator, a decent man. And he's introduced a bill. And what it's called is the Defend the United States Against Sharia Law. So it's about the defense of the United States against Sharia law. Now, why is that important? First Amendment of the United States Constitution talks about various freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. Freedom of religion has a corollary: freedom from religion. The government has no business, nor does any group have a business, of imposing their religious views on other people. You cannot tell everyone who is not a Catholic that they have to become a Catholic. No one has a right to tell everyone who's not a Protestant you have to become a Protestant. No one has a right to say that the Jewish Old Testament views have to be supreme. No one has a right to say that the Buddhists or the Hindus or the followers of Islam.
And certainly no one has the right to try to enforce it as well.
Exactly right, and use the government and the political process to enforce it. Now, why is Sharia law so dangerous? Because Sharia law, by its very nature, both in its political and its religious text, shows total intolerance for divergence of religious thought. It's unacceptable. And if you look at it very, very carefully, and this is not me speaking, it's a lot of folks who are Muslims who've written about this. And if you have any doubt that I'm correct about that, go to Gatestone, a wonderful publication, and it's also on a blog. It's a wonderful, thoughtful commentary, and a lot of the writers are Muslim, talking about the dangers of Sharia law and this Islamic fundamentalism, where there's no tolerance for a different point of view.
Well, you have to commend the people who wrote that and researched that and have made a case that you really can't refute. You could condemn them, but you can't belie what they're saying.
I wouldn't condemn them. I say, listen to what they have to say. I said my point is that Sharia law imposes no freedom of religion. It has no tolerance for any diversity. They have certain views that are primitive in terms of cutting off the hands of thieves, throwing homosexuals off buildings, crimes, so-called honor crimes, where honor killings, where if a woman doesn't adhere to the views of the father about who she should date or who she should marry, the father and the brothers kill her because they've dishonored the family. This all comes out of Sharia law, unfortunately. And if you look in London and Paris, and you go in certain portions
these
of
small conclaves where they observe it there.
They observe it, and the legitimate authorities can't go in. There are no-go zones. And what Senator Cornyn is correctly pointing out is we can't allow this to happen in the United States. This is not Islamophobia, Governor. This is freedom of religion. If you want to adhere to Sharia law where you can throw people off a roof because of their sexual orientation or do an honor killing because your daughter won't date or somebody you want or marry somebody you want, then go back to the old country where that kind of nonsense is tolerated, but don't try to impose that in the United States of America.
What do you think is the reason or the interest that the people who try to enforce this kind of conduct want to do it here in the United States? Like you said, why don't they just stay where they were and practice it there? Because,
again, you go back to the religious texts and you go back to the political texts. They founded in Egypt in the 1920s, the Islamic Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood. It's clear that they're looking for world domination of their religious point of view, and they want to organize society based on that. That's the problem.
Judge Richard Weinberg, we don't have Sharia law here at WABC, but we do have the law of time, which we're out of. And I can't thank you enough for joining me here this afternoon. And hopefully somewhere in the near future, we'll do it again.
It's always a pleasure, Governor. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for listening to The Left versus the Right. You can hear The Left versus the Right Saturday afternoons at 4. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?